Hello, welcome to the Autistic Witch. My name is Claire and I'm going to today talk a little bit about some of the history involving the word witch and what's happened in the past, and also my emotions connected to this in our modern day society. Now, behind me is one of my artworks that I've done, and this was inspired by a woman, a story that has been reported in the past of some witches that were found at a church in Wallsend in the northeast of England. These witches were apparently found by Sir Francis Blake Delville, who was one of the lords at Seaton Delville Hall and owned vast tracts of land and property and was incredibly powerful and wealthy. So we only have as history the story as reported at the time, and this is of course from the male perspective, from those in power and those who held all the control. So this poor woman had been captured by Lord Delville and was burnt at Seaton Sluice Beach. We don't know the exact date when this happened, but it must have happened around sometime in the 1700s. This particular Lord Delville died in 1771, so it must have been at some point before his death. But anyway, I produced this work of art based on this because when I thought about this story, I had this very powerful vision of this woman. She apparently resisted her death and made an unusual request at the time. She requested 2 wooden bowls to be brought to her, and apparently put both of her feet into those bowls. Now, as I say, we've no idea what the truth of this all is, but apparently because she was this witch, she tried to fly away and avoid being burned. Well, to our modern day ears, that just seems ridiculous. But it also is reflective of how these women were viewed. If this woman had resisted in some way, it was part of that sort of judgment, that vitriol, that sort of hate that they clearly would have put on her for just resisting being burnt at the stake. So I produced this work, and I was thinking about my own health and some of the ways in which I had been treated as well, particularly by the medical sector, and how as a woman just getting my autism diagnosis had been its own journey, and how I had to fight basically and show that I did meet the criteria, that I wasn't prepared to be dismissed, that, I was going to stand up and say, no, you're wrong. This is where I fit the criteria. This is how autism shows up in women, and how I had to go through that journey myself. So it's been, I think as women, and whether we define ourselves as non-binary or however we define ourselves, we're still physically in the bodies of women and are viewed and judged by society as women, regardless of how we define ourselves. We can't seem to escape that. Anyway, I decided to do some thinking about all of this and to reflect about some of this. One of the things that I was reflecting on is how I love history, and I've always loved history, but there's certain elements of history that I find really unpalatable and really challenging to deal with. So, for example, I'm quite freaked out when it comes to going into a prison, a dungeon, a place of torture, and I find it really just really uncomfortable to see these places as places of entertainment, you know, where people go to be thrilled and to see the fake screams and the fake blood and to have the staff do this reenactment. And it's just really, I find it really distasteful. And I think there's that part of me that really knows this, that really that doesn't need to see the pretend version, because I feel I have lived it for real, you know, and I have, you know, no desire to see it again. And as well as those places that freak me out, it also, I feel it from pictures as well, you know, particularly pictures at the time of the burnings and the witch trials, where they have those woodcuts and they usually showing quite horrific detail what happens to them, and how the townsfolk as well in those communities are forced to watch and witness these burnings, and it's all part of that terrorization of women. So of course, you know, as a woman at that time, you would have been terrorized into being made quiet, made small, made obedient and malleable, you know. So today, my use of the word witch has been this evolutionary path. It's been this process. And I feel this is because of this deep inner feeling, this knowing of what persecution was like, what it felt like, that terror, that horror, that, you know, its symbolic meaning meant that I internally found it really uncomfortable and had rejected that term for quite a long time. So I've never really been, you know, into the Hollywood versions of it, or the commercial sort of spell books and cloaks that are available in your New Age shops and all that sort of stuff. I think that commercialization, again, I find distasteful. It's been a very personal, sacred journey for me. Yeah, I feel it's been a long calling that has really been an imprint from long ago and left me feeling very fearful, very anxious about using that word and defining myself as a witch. And I think it's all about judgment. It's all about how others perceive me and how society, you know, uses and abuses that term. And I think, you know, in this lifetime, I am a single person. I define myself as non-binary. I have never married. I don't have children. And, you know, what the world sees, the world sees an obese woman who perhaps they view as selfish because I haven't had children, because I live an unconventional, unapologetic life. And, you know, when I think about that, I think, yeah, perhaps I am in classic witch territory here. You know, how could you define a witch? What do you have in your you know, stereotypical view of what a witch looks like? You know, and yes, I do have a black cat as well, just to add to that. But, you know, I find all of this really uncomfortable, and it is, as I say, all about being judged and viewed as other by society. So before my diagnosis, I very keenly felt that sense of other and that sense of otherness. That it felt like a terrible indictment that I was somehow broken, that other people were more worthy than me, that they were more deserving, and so on. So I had this feeling of very deep shame about myself, and I was constantly trying to change who I was to make myself more worthy, basically, or what I thought was more worthy. So I've had to go through this sort of reckoning process, this process of acceptance, this process of healing, so I can be more unapologetically me. But it's still quite a brave thing to do, you know. The authentic me can still get hidden underneath fear and worry about what others think, you know, and I am only human, you know, and even though I've been trying to break down these barriers and overcome this darker shadow side, it still crops up, it still shows up, and I still have those anxieties, particularly among certain groups of people, saying, you know, I am non-binary and a witch. It's like blows their mind, you know, particularly amongst conservative types who perhaps live quite narrow-minded existences, and so, you know, I'm pretty out there as far as they're concerned. So this has been a kind of slow process, this evolutionary process of me healing, me getting to grips with the past traumas that have been inflicted on a whole section of society, and the way it's been used to oppress and control particularly women. And so, you know, when I think about this word and its implications, I've had to go through this whole sort of reckoning and trying to sort of reconcile myself with the use of the word. But now the Autistic Witch has been birthed. She now wants to come out kicking and screaming, and wants to share this wisdom, and it feels like it's beyond this lifetime. You know, they want to honour themselves. They want to honour the earth. They want to speak about really complex issues and how there's 100 ways in which to view the truth, and how do we know what the truth is, and to talk about privilege as well. Because privilege to me is a very emotive word also, you know, as well as the word witch, the word privilege is immensely potent. And what I realised is that this is far from about wealth. It's really about emotional, social and political freedom. Just my freedom to be able to say I am a witch in UK society is a privilege, because let's face it, there are still persecutions which happen in other parts of the world. Look at Ghana, for example, where they have these witch camps where often older women in society are exiled into absolute poverty and, you know, have so little, virtually nothing to live on, to eat, you know, no support. They're exiled by their communities, they're rejected by their family, they're absolutely traumatized. You know, it's unbelievable, but it still exists, it still happens. And these women also get killed. you know, and I just, when I learn about this kind of stuff, I'm like, wow, that's unbelievable. So, you know, this notion, I have privilege to be able to speak about this, but I recognize that privilege is a spectrum. In the same way that autism is a spectrum, privilege too is a spectrum. So, you know, you have at one end the voice privilege, for example. Some people with autism can't speak, so therefore they don't even have voice privilege. And then you've got at the other end of the spectrum, you know, the lives of someone like myself, who is able to define myself as non-binary and a witch and live this life of relative freedom, and yet we still have lots of subtle inequalities that exist. And I think that can be hidden by this comparing. Also, we'll compare our lives to what's happening in Ghana and say, well, you shouldn't complain. Actually, that's really, you know, a toxic way to view it, and isn't, I don't believe, is right. So yes, it is okay in the UK. We are no longer persecuted in the same way by burning, drowning, or hanging, or torture, or whatever. But this subtle persecution still exists because it's so pervasive within our society, you know, and it's so deeply embedded. So yeah, I've had to go through this whole process of using the word witch and what that feels like and what that means to me. So thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe and leave any comments, and I hope to be back soon. Thank you from the Autistic Witch.